We actually had two microphones here. Monica knows all about it. So, we actually had two microphones here. Monica knows all about it. So, we actually had two microphones here. Monica knows all about it.
We have to end like 5 minutes. You can pick wherever you want. We're letting.
Actually had two microphones here. Monica knows all about it.
So, go.
You can pick wherever you want.
There's a lot around the cover.
We're letting.
I don't know who's talking online. So, go.
You can pick wherever you want.
There's a lot around the cover. Talking online. Good.
All right, let's start with it. Thank you.
So we will reconvene the budget committee today, and we're going to begin. Monica and Andy have some opening remarks that they want to make, and then we're going to we will move to emergency management. We want to just remind people this is the part of our program here. There's a lot of sticking around, and we'll be very careful to let people know what page we're on, so nobody gets lost. And if you do get lost, please ask me to pause. Okay, Monica.
Thank you, Chair. So as you mentioned, we do just want to kind of touch base a little bit in regards to what we discussed early on around the budget message and the general fund balance, and what there's been a lot of conversation around about deficit spending. And one thing I want to remind everybody is that Oregon budget law requires that you have a balanced budget. And so when we say deficit spending, that does not mean that we're spending money that we do not have. It means that we have reserves. And in some instances, there are significant reserves and they're above what the board policy of 20 to 30% is. And so we just wanted to provide you all a reason why we have been deficit spending. And so if you look back to the fiscal year of 2021, we had a reserve fund balance in the general fund of 58%. And what this means is that we had more than 50% reserves of our total expenditures. And so we knew that that's a pretty hefty amount to have on hand. And we took a strategic approach to spend those reserves down. And so, we go down to 54%, 48%. So when we deficit spent, it has not been a drastic nosedive. It has been a thoughtful process slowly going down. We are forecasting to end fiscal year 23-24 with a 37% fund balance reserve and forecasting to end 24-25 with 33%. We already anticipate, because again, these are projections that we're doing beginning in January and February. And so we still have 6 months of the fiscal year that we're trying to determine how it's going to end. And we already are anticipating that our reserves ending 24 will be slightly higher than 37%. So we only went out to fiscal year 24-25, which is this budget that you all are looking to approve, because again, we don't know what 26, 27, 27, 28, and so forth are going to bring, because there's still a lot of unknowns that we've discussed, such as revenue replacement from the state, if that's going to happen, flexibility that we are hoping to get through legislation regarding the transient room tax. So right now we're looking at how we're going to end this year and where we think that we'll be at the end of next year. And I just want to say that this is all, it changed. Okay, this is all stuff that we constantly do throughout the year anyways. And so we know that we're probably going to be coming in higher than that 37% because we're doing these things now. And these are things that we're also going to be working on in 24-25. So in regards to the revenues, for beginning fund balance, we already anticipate that they're going to be coming in a little bit higher than we originally forecasted. The legislative session, again, that's when we're going to be talking about what options we might be able to get from the state. The sheriff mentioned at the last meeting that we're looking at contracting with other counties to bring in revenues for the jail. And then we've also already received news on some, but we hope to continue to receive additional news on federally funded grants that we applied for, that typically those costs would come from special projects, which again is that discretionary revenue. And so if we're able to get federal funding for some of those, then that's going to help offset some of those timber revenues that we would use for projects in-house. On the expense side, we're already looking at some of the things that can be done. Outside contributions. We want to support the programs that are county-wide, but in some instances that might mean that we have to reduce those services or those resources that we're providing to other agencies, because we need to be able to provide the services in-house first. Our organizational structure. We have people that are retiring or choosing to leave the county or whatever the case may be. And so looking at our organizational structure and how it might be able to be structured differently so that we might be able to save on some of those overhead administrative costs. As mentioned before, there's also people who are going to be leaving the county, and when and where we can postpone filling those positions, that's going to help us realize savings as well. And then materials and services. Do we really need to look at acquiring certain materials and services this year? Can we try and hold it off and try and find a cheaper option in another way, whether that's something that we do in-house, or instead of doing it in-house, do we contract it? So just analyzing those different options that we have. And this is all on page 60, beginning on page 60 in your budget document. So this isn't something new. This is part of the board's budget policies and part of the resource management policies and principles. And so these are things that have been in place for a number of years, so that as we have those fund balances, we can constantly look at it and figure out whether or not we need to deficit spend, which again, the monies are there, we just aren't spending it, or we just aren't hanging on to it. We're utilizing it in another way. And there's a couple pages of that, but those are the main points. And so we just wanted to touch on that, because there has been a lot of conversation generated around that, and we hear everybody's concern, and we have a plan, and we will continue to work with the board. You know, once we get through this budget process, then we're going to be entering into the next fiscal year. So come October through December, prior to the legislative session, we're going to be looking to have that conversation with the board again, because we're going to have a better idea of what the first quarter of the fiscal year 24-25 looks like. And then we're going to be able to go into the legislative session knowing what it is that we're going to be asking for. Any questions before? Yes.
I just suppose, historically speaking, how much of that deficit spending that we've done since 2021 has been associated to capital improvements versus associated to technical?
It's all general fund. Capital improvements happen out of the special projects fund. So that's all personnel, materials, and services.
Personnel, materials, and services.
Yeah.
Okay, and so the deficit spending for this next fiscal session will be all materials, personnel.
Mm-hmm.
I think you said, I mean, it's fair to say that we're getting 50% of reserves, we're actually out of it. Oh, that's. You're not out, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so, all right, I'm standing back, I've been sick, and so,
So stand over and breathe.
yeah, so I've been traveling. So what I would say is, you know, we manage the county over a multi-year period. It's not just 1 year, it is multi-year. So when Monica talked about this trajectory that has shown the fund balance slowly being reduced, that was part of a multi-year plan. And really 24-25, we know that we're gonna have to reset to another 5-year planning period, because we know that the HCP really will impact us, we assume, in the 26-27 years out. And we also know that the 2025 legislative session is going to be a key point not just for us, but for a lot of the coastal counties, a lot of the rural counties. And so, so there's a lot of conversations with other counties, lobbyists about what that legislative agenda might be looking like. But this has been planned, and we were sitting on way more money. So when you sit on too much reserve, that's money that's not going into the community providing services. And one of the things that did happen during that timeframe is we opened up a new jail. And so some of those expenses were opening up the new jail expenses, which when I look at this in its totality, we will get to a current revenue, current expenditure balance through this next fiscal year. What we're dealing with is deficit spending, but when you deficit spend, it's not one or two things, one or two levers that you pull to fix it. It's like 50, 100 different ones. As you look at the county budget, it's a very complex, interwoven, document, but it's almost its own ecosystem on how counties function. I hired a city finance director who wants to be the county finance director, and they were shocked at how complex the counties are. But there are 50 or 100 levers we're going to pull to land the plane exactly where we need to land it. It's going to be challenging though, because we have an uncertain revenue future. There's a lot of things that are going on with the state and the federal government that could impact us, and it impacts economic development, it impacts AV growth. And so there's a lot of things, and we take them all seriously, but I just want to reassure folks that we do watch this doggedly. We know where we're at. We have plans. We will vet those plans with the board, starting early in the next fiscal year. And I don't feel like we're behind the 8 ball. I feel like we're exactly where we need to be given what these major challenges are. And so, but we're happy to answer any questions. I think concern is great because we are concerned, but we have a plan. So.
I don't understand with all of my years in government, looking at budgets. Why are we calling this deficit spending if we're spending out?
Because these aren't earned revenues, they're existing revenues that we have that are sitting in those reserves. So when you look at new revenue that's coming in, like, property taxes collected, fees, grants, all that sort of stuff, new revenues earned, and our new revenues are less than our expenditures. So if you don't use some of your savings, it's considered deficit spending.
We don't use some of what we are.
We're using some of our savings, but it's not new revenue, so it's just referred to as deficit spending, because if you didn't have those savings, you would be in a deficit.
But I mean, I
don't know.
maybe it's because I've only worked for counties in other states. And so maybe it's my city that I've been working. But I've never seen this, I've never heard that time when we had such a substantial. First of all, I would like to say here, forgive me, but I've worked for government in the White House to see all for years. Okay, I know a little bit about it. And the idea, I have never ever seen a contingency. No, I mean, the norm is about 20%. And so to me, this is extraordinary. We've been, I mean, this is, that nobody here thinks that nobody. I mean, that's not the way going. We don't, I mean, we zero-based budgeting, which is now about 40 years old in this state, in this country. It used to do that, but I think we've learned over the years that we have to think about doing that. And I think that what has happened here in West, and I have voiced sometimes opposition to the fact that we have such a large contingency. But now I'm really happy. So I'm sorry, I just the word deficit just doesn't ring true with me because I don't think we would call that in our homes business. We wouldn't use that.
Mr. Thompson, you want to comment?
Bring it down. Well, having come from an economy in Michigan, when I went to Alaska and came down to Oregon, I learned about the boom and bust economy, the volatility in the revenues in this part of the world because we don't have the manufacturing economy. I mean, we've been working to develop and some kinds of value added to build up that, we call it that middle class capacity center of the budget. What we've done here is to take into account the volatility of the revenues, and I assume that it's simply a language and convention for those who must be obeyed in terms of those who define our reality and how we voice it, even though it may not be intuitively sensible to people who don't operate in that very particular refined domain.
I just wanted to verbalize, I understand, spending down our back makes sense, especially if we are to be turning around and asking legislatures for consideration and future funding opportunities for us. We can't sit on a large piggy bank in order to do so. I would say that I don't want to, and I know that the board has in past history set our piggy bank for a better term, our reserve at 30%. And when I think of deficit spending, I think of it as we are spending more than we are earning. And so the trend, the 5-year trend of deficit spending more than what we are earning makes me uncomfortable. I'm glad to hear that we are going to be leveling out at that nice, 30% level, especially since we don't know what's going to happen to us in the 2027-2028 budget season, when the full effects of adverse realities are going to be impacting us. But this will help our conversation at the state level. If we spend down closer to our threshold, I don't want to go below it, especially with the number of unknowns that we have in our future. And yes.
Yeah, if I could just gonna answer, gonna reference a couple points. Commissioner Webb's right, typically for a county, you would see 15 to 20% from the offices for the reserve. I think there was at a point where the county was around 17%. So that is pretty typical for us, though, because of the volatility of our revenues. We've had conversations with the board about increasing that to a level that gives us flexibility, because on the one side, we are planning multiple years out. If something bad happens, you want to have a runway of multiple years out to actually address and manage through that. So it's very common for counties to go through cycles of spending in a deficit. When I say deficit, it just means current revenues more than current expenditures. That happens all the time. And there are cycles where it happens for 2 or 3 years, and then there's a surplus. And if it's a big surplus, then there's going to be deficit spending in some other years. So it's a very common phenomenon. We took a long approach to actually reducing the reserve amount, because we didn't want to just, decimate it in 1 year or 2 years. We could be close to 40% at the end of this year, 38, I think is what the estimate is. But if our year end turns out better than we thought, we could be closer to 40. It means the 33% that we're estimating at the end of next year will actually be higher than that. So to Commissioner Banks, what I would say is that we're probably going to land at above 30%. Even after all of this, we will still land above the 30% mark. It could be 35%, which just gives us a little more flexibility as we go into the legislative session and all the other. So we're still managing it for the long term. We're still managing for stability. Part of what our goal always is, and I know it's the goal of the board, is we want to provide quality services based on the priorities of the board and of the community, and to do those really effectively and efficiently. So as we reduce the size of the organization, which will naturally occur, we're going to be working with the board to make sure that we hit those right levers as we go, because there are services behind all these resources. And so, and there is a calibration that happens. It's never one thing. It's always dozens and dozens of things we do to maintain services, maintain morale of the organization, maintain accountability and transparency, all those things.
Thank you. I just want to say, I mean, you know, a budget by definition is for a single year, but the planning that the county is doing allows us to look at the budget in much better context than if this planning hadn't been done. And I at least am reassured by the work that you all do. Are there any other comments? Okay, then we will turn to the first item that we have today on our list, which is under public safety and justice. This is emergency management. When it starts, I think it's 203.
So, in the emergency management budget, for the most part, this is a status quo budget. Again, you're going to be hearing a lot of that. However, there are some slight changes, and one of those changes being that it appears as though there's an additional FTE. This is an existing FTE that's currently budgeted for in the public health department, but emergency management is going to be taking on the emergency preparedness program. So the FTE that was in public health is now going to move over into emergency management. And so the funding that we receive from the state will also be coming through into emergency management for that programming. Any questions on that?
Okay, well now, yes.
I just want to say the improvements in the emergency management are not improvements, but the more visibility we have. And so, high five. Everybody's pretty.
Yeah, I just like to say Justin's done an amazing job, and we're so fortunate to have him on our team leading the emergency management function as well.
Yes.
Very good. So now we're going to take our first jump. We're going to jump to page 250. And on that page,
Excuse me, but I asked a question about timing. I heard two different times that we're heading to.
So we are hoping to be able to stop this meeting at 6:45 because we do have our regular board meeting that starts at 7. So if you do, we do have for the board and the budget committee members over in the corner some pizza. So we ask that you just kind of get up and continue to participate on the conversation. And so that way, if you do want to have a snack, we can kind of continue to move things along. If we are not able to wrap things up by 6:45 tonight, we do have tomorrow scheduled for 4 p.m., which is virtual only.
Is there anything to drink?
There's water over there as well, water and cups and napkins and plates. Yes.
and I do want to encourage people to ask questions. We have enough time to get through the entire thing.
We're already.
But it's okay.
So,
Okay, page 250 is community health.
So in regards to the public health department, this is one of those departments that, as I already mentioned, one of the FTE is going to be moving over to emergency management. And then there's another 0.9 decrease in FTE, and that had to do with a disease intervention specialist position, which was a state-funded position that is no longer funded by the state. You will see when you look through these different org units within the health department that there's a lot of shifting of FTE. And we've had these conversations before. It's not that the people are going anywhere, it's simply that they're following the program funding. And so as we go through this fiscal year, as well as moving into next fiscal year, we are still waiting for the state to finalize their budget. And so a lot of this funding is based on what we know our current contracts are. One of the things that I would also like to help you all understand is the general fund and the ARPA funds are providing support to the public health department. And because again, we're taking a look at all of those, we are looking at what some of those cost saving measures might be. And in some instances, that might mean programs that we run for the state might go back to the state because the state does not fully fund them for us to be able to do. And so those are considerations that we'll be talking about with the board as we move through this next 24-25 fiscal year.
This might be part of what we're just talking about, but I'm noticing that we're losing funding for a couple things I think are pretty important here, like HIV and STD prevention, and then also the fentanyl campaign funds.
Can I I'd like to get to the specific funds.
Okay.
So, you know, I think if we move more expeditiously, we can do that way. Rather than jumping around. So let me just say, questions right now on the community health fund on pages 250, 251.
And I think that's what Clara was referring to. Yeah, so so in regards to HIV and STD prevention. And so some of this has to do with the state funding. And Jill, do you have anything to add in regards to the reduction of state funding in HIV?
That would be the, I think, connected to the DIM.
The disease intervention specialist. Yeah.
Functionally, it will have not much affected. Yeah, functionally it will not affect very much. And it's very unfortunate the CDC at the federal government cut we call DIS, Disease Investigation Specialist, line off. And we work with state and really try to keep it, but we couldn't.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then to answer your question about the fentanyl, if you look a little bit further down, there is a different line item that funding is being received into in regards to public health infrastructure.
Which one is that?
It's like 2 lines down, yeah. But one thing that the state is notorious for is providing one-time funding. And so in some instances, when we think that we're going to be receiving funding, you'll receive something and then the next year the program goes away. But we are, in other programs, we do have funding to try and address some of the drug problems that we're having, specifically around prevention and hopefully some to do with treatment as well. So,
Okay.
So I see line items for student-based health centers. We've obviously it's been zero for a really long time. With Jewel School District and their loss of funding, is that going to end up popping onto our roles, or are they?
So the Jewel School-Based Health Center, again, that's one of the things where the state gives us money. We create a new line item. You have to show it for 3 years. We did create a separate org unit, which you will see when we get a little bit further. The School-Based Health Center for Jewel, that org unit is becoming inactive because that program is being contracted out with a separate agency now.
Okay.
So that is still
pivoted.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not part of the county budget now,
Okay.
it's its own thing, and it's.
I just wondered if it's another thing that we collect or. Cool. Thank you.
There's a few areas that it's hard to know what these things mean, like P 51-01, P 51 modern.
So that is how the state provides us with funding. PE means program element, and when you get into mental health, it's SE, which is service element. And so PE 5105, PE 51-03, I think, they are public health modernization dollars. And so this is just what the state calls the different program fundings that they have, and each program element is specific to a different types of services that have to be provided. The public health modernization is mostly around governance, community outreach, strategic planning, the infrastructure of public health.
So am I right in thinking you have this huge variety of things you can do in this area? And is it right to say that a lot of it is driven by the funding sources that you get more than almost anything else?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the priorities of the state and the legislature change all the time, so it does change and creates a lot of vacillation with the types of funding that are coming in, the duration of the funding, and the adequacy of the funding to actually accomplish what the goal is.
And given that, are you able to measure kind of the outcomes of these various programs?
So we do have in the back section, in the appendix is where work plans are that kind of speak to those outcomes for the different programs. And we can, I don't know, did public health make it in there?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, and, oh yeah, they're at the very end. So the public health work plan, it begins on page 639. And so it can speak to those questions. And I think Danelle had a question.
I do have a question. In my line of work, I watch the rabies count and it's going up in this county. Is there anything in this budget for at-risk populations for putting counter the rabies virus? Say the public, veterinarians or their staff or wildlife center or anything like that who